Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you. So, I decided to cover Tearlaments. It's been quite a while since I've covered just kind of a straight up sort of quote-unquote pure Tearlaments deck. Usually especially lately since the deck has been hit, I've been blending it more with like the punks and sometimes zombies, synchroing and all that, but I wanted to just sit behind the wheel of an honest-to-goodness, straight-up Tearlament deck and see just what I thought of it. As you can see, it's not even Kashtira. I mean, we do have a couple of Kashtira cards, but we're not on, like, Unicorns or Birthray full Kashtira package or anything. So, I think Tearlaments, a lot of people, I think, kind of assume this deck is in a state where you often have to pair it with another archetype, and it's certainly not bad to do that, right? Tearlament is definitely looking to be a part of any deck that is sending a lot of cards to the graveyard, milling in particular. So, and of course, there's a lot of archetypes that already play pretty conducive to that style and within a pile sort of deck. However, I do think that pure Tearlaments, or I guess Purelaments if you want to call them that, and again, I know this isn't like 100% pure, mostly because the archetype has had so many hits. It's kind of like Sprite, right? Where it's really hard to play this deck pure without the help of a bunch of additional support cards. For those, in this case for us, those are going to be a couple of the two Shizu cards you're allowed to have, the newer ones, Keldo and Mudora. We have the help of, again, a few Kashtira cards, like Kashtira Fenrir and Wraitsoth, as well as, of course, Tearlaments Kashtira. Supreme Sea Mare, we're also utilizing this as basically additional copies of Reinoheart, but do note that this is much worse than Reinoheart. It's pretty easy to read it and be like, oh, how is it much worse? It does the exact same thing. The problem is, and this came up even within my testing games here, right, which weren't very many, but even within the few games I played with this build, if the Supreme Sea Mare gets like ashed or impermed or just negated, and you have some of the Tearlaments trap cards, you're not going to be able to use them because, well, Supreme Sea Mare does not have Tearlament in its name. So you'd always rather see Reinoheart, like, even if the card is going to get negated, or I guess really, especially if the card is going to get negated, you'd always rather have Reinoheart than Supreme Sea Mare. That's like one of the main drawbacks of my experience with this card. It's also not like the best to mill because it doesn't really do anything except get fused as an aqua material for like Kaliedo-Heart or Kitkallos, but it's not a bad card. Again, especially if you're going to be on a quote-unquote Purelaments kind of build here, then you're definitely going to want a couple of copies of Supreme Sea Mare, I think, to kind of help keep your deck a little bit more consistent, right? We're on a playset of Super Polys as well, which I was also on for our Branded Espia build, and I gotta say, I love having 3 Super Polymerization in decks that can support it. I know in my recent video, when I talked about hand traps versus board breakers, I did mention that generally speaking, hand traps tend to be better than board breakers in a best of one. But I did also note that Super Poly, along with Forbidden Droplet, are a couple of notable exceptions where this card is, of course, great, good, even just good, great at breaking boards, but on top of that, it's also great disruption. You can go first and set this, and you're not sad to open this going first, right? Because you can still, again, just set it and then use it on your opponent's turn. So, yeah, just a very, very great card all around. For our Super Poly targets, we have a few. We've got Mudragon of the Swamp and Garura Wings of Restorant Life. Dragostapelia can often end up being a Super Poly target, but I wouldn't really call this one of my dedicated Super Poly targets. Another dedicated target I do have in here, though, is the Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. Generally speaking, when it comes to Super Poly targets, I like to, of course, start with Garura and then go to Mudragon. It's not too common where I'll go for the Starving Venom Fusion Dragon as well. But there were a few reasons why I opted to include this in the extra deck. One, it's a great card. Like, if you can actually summon this thing, off Super Poly or not, this is a pretty phenomenal card, right? The effects are all very relevant, especially at board breaking. It's got huge stats. It can copy. If you're lucky, it can even copy, like, an Omni-Negate effect. Like, if you activate the copy effect and target a Baron, then your opponent's in a really tough spot because they either have to use the Baron Negate on the Starving Venom, which will destroy it and then cause them to lose their entire field, or they have to let it resolve, which will then give you an Omni-Negate plus Destroy to help you go into your plays as well. But on top of that, we also just, like, definitely have the room in this extra deck, right? Because we're not blending Tearlaments with any other particular archetype, and when it comes to, like, actual Tearlaments stuff in the extra deck. It's literally just Kitkallos, Rulkallos, Kaliedo-Heart, and I'd call Dragostapelia an honorary Tearlaments monster when it comes to being considered for the extra deck. Pretty much every tier extra deck wants Dragostapelia, but you know, aside from that, there's not really many, if any, dedicated slots you really gotta have for Tearlaments stuff. So, with the extra deck being wide open, we have the room for the extra Super Poly target. 2 Dark Monsters, not uncommon at all, and it's just a phenomenal card. It's much better than Garura or Mudragon. So, although Mudragon being level 4 is sometimes relevant for going into like a rank 4, we're actually gonna see an example of that in the games coming up here. For synchros, we do have a couple of synchros because we do have a Destrudo, the Lost Dragon's Fission here in the main deck. So, most of the time, this will be coming out at level 3, right? Because it'll be targeting a level 4 monster, so this will be coming out at 3. That's why we have the synchro targets that we do. The FA Dawn Dragster, in general, is just great with Destrudo. I like with Destrudo having the level 7 synchro option, because, you know, sometimes you only have the thing that you targeted with Destrudo's effect to sync with, right? So, and FA Dawn Dragster is definitely not a bad card at all. It's basically a spell trap card, firm negate. That's a negate and destroy, I believe. Yeah, negate and destroy. So, very, very good card. We also have, of course, Baron de Fleur, in case we were able to pair up the level 3 Destrudo with either of our Kashtira monsters here. And the Tearlaments Kashtira is one of the cards that is most frequently searched with Kitkallos. I mean, what you search with Kitkallos does actually just super depend on what your hand looks like, but a decent amount of time, you can just bin the tier cache, mill a couple of cards, then sack Kitkallos, bring back tier cache, in between this card getting sent to the graveyard, and that effect's proccing to the mill 5, to milling another 3. That's a total of 10 mills off of that interaction, which is a lot. I don't think you need me to tell you that it is quite a bit there. So, yeah, I was very satisfied with this build. I was a little worried when I went to test this that I was gonna miss having the Punks or some other archetype to help, you know, bring up the perceived, and it was all perceived slack, but no, yeah, this list was phenomenal. I had a ton of great games playing it, and we're going to see a few of them just as soon as I'm done breaking down the list. So let's go ahead and do that. We are on 2 Droll and Lockbird, 3 Maxx, 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 1 Tearlaments Havnis, 1 Fairy Tale Snoo, 2 Supreme Sea Mare, 2 Tearlaments Scheiren, 3 Tearlaments Reinoheart, 1 Keldo the Sacred Protector, 1 Mudora the Sword Oracle, 1 Destrudo the Lost Dragon's Fission, 1 Kashtira Fenrir, 1 Tearlaments Kashtira, 1 Foolish Burial, 1 Reinforcement of the Army, 1 Foolish Burial Goods, 1 Tearlaments Grief, 1 Primeval Planet Perlerino, 1 Pressured Planet Wraitsoth, 3 Tearlaments Scream, 3 Super Polymerization, 2 Call by the Grave, 1 Tearlaments Heartbeat, 1 Tearlaments Metanoise, 1 Tearlaments Cryme, and then finally 1 Tearlaments Sulliek. And that's going to be our main deck. For the extra deck, we are on 1 Mudragon of the Swamp, 1 Tearlaments Kitkallos, 1 Garura Wings of Restorant Life, 1 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, 1 Predaplant Dragostapelia, 1 Tearlaments Rulkallos, 1 Tearlaments Kaliedo-Heart, 1 FA Dawn Dragster, 1 Baron de Fleur, 1 number 41 Baguska, the terribly tired Tapir, 1 Time Thief Redoer, 1 Divine Arsenal Zeus Sky Thunder, 1 Cross Sheep, 1 Dark the Dark Charmer Gloomy, and then finally 1 Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. And that is our list. Let's see those games here. Okay, our first opponent is going to be on a 60-card Branded Despia list. Branded Despia being what a lot of people would consider, and honestly myself as well, to be the best fusion deck of the format. Little weird to call that so good when Tearlaments is a thing, but you know, it does end up being the case here. So we're going to end up going second. Opponent's going to immediately Albion for the Retribution. That of course tells me they're setting up the Branded Fusion. And in that regard, even as they're throwing out the Branded Opening and the Aliber, I'm not going to use the Ash Blossom here. But note that I also did not chain the Maxx to the Aliber, or to the Branded Opening for the Aliber either. Now, this might have been a little bit greedy of me, but I decided not to. The reason I decided not to is because I've already got Tearlaments Reinoheart in my hand, and hopefully, probably, ideally, this should be just plays by itself, right? I have a Super Poly 2 to maybe help pick up the slack if needed, but with a Tearlaments Reinoheart, I don't think I necessarily need any other draws. And here's the thing, too. I'm already planning on using the Ash Blossom to stop my opponent's Branded Fusion. So, in that regard, I don't want to cycle the Maxx for a single draw here, because I don't need to do it that badly. But if I can save the Maxi and potentially get multiple draws or have it be a turn-ending play later in the game, then I could, potentially use it for that reason. And if the Ash Blossom isn't enough and the Braid of Fusion, like if they have a call by or something and it resolves, I can just chain Maxi then. And I've only missed out on one draw as a result. So I hedged a little bit, not chaining Maxi to the opening to potentially get more draws out of it in a future turn. Is why I did not use Maxi there. So again, Alibur, we're definitely not going to use that. They're adding Branded Lost. This is all so clearly Ash bait. And sure enough, here's a Braid of Fusion, and now here is my Ash Blossom. I do also want to note that while my opponent was doing this, like, honestly, as soon as they sent the Albion, right? As soon as they showed me they were on branded, I actually held my toggle to off. I usually have it to on the opponent's turn, but I wanted to hold it to off to hide the fact that I had the Ash Blossom to hopefully avoid a world where my opponent was able to play around it, right? I do think that is worthwhile. You just got to make sure to watch your toggle and that it's not held to off when they're activating the card that you want to negate, but I do think that practice is worthwhile, for sure. I don't think my opponent was falling for it here, but they still tried to play around the Ash Blossom. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, they end up just going to the end phase as soon as the Branded Fusion was negated. So I'm very glad I held on to this Maxi. Now, of course, I'm going to have to call by a Maxi here, making holding on to it not that great. I'll just fire it off here in case they end up having a Bestial monster on my turn or a Nibiru or something, or just, a Fusion Summon. Although they don't have any set cards, so I'm not really anticipating a Fusion Summon, but so yeah, I ended up having to fire off the Maxi in response to a called by on a Maxi, but that aside, I don't think it was bad at all for me to hold the Maxi there. I think it definitely ended up paying off, or I guess it would have more if they didn't have a call by, but anyway. Gonna normal summon the Reinoheart, pitching and activating Havnis. They do have the Bestial, so the Maxi is still going to cycle for one draw. So in the grand scheme of things, I didn't lose out on any draws, and actually that follow-up Reinoheart there is definitely not too shabby at all. But in any case, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use Super Poly to fuse for the Mudragon. Now, it might seem weird. You might be like, Hex, you just spit the deck profile talking of how good Starving Venom Fusion was. You fused 2 Dark Monsters, but you summoned the Mudragon. Why not the Starving Venom Fusion Dragon? The main reason here is because Mudragon is level 4. This is the interaction I was also talking about during the deck profile, where occasionally I do want to summon the Mudragon and go for a rank 4. Also, I'm not going to go for Redoer and then overlay into Zeus. I'd rather just go for the Baguska. Because, honestly, I feel like, I mean, to be fair, the opponent's in top deck mode, so the Zeus probably would have just been enough to stop them no matter what, too. But, I don't know, with the Zeus's board wipe, I feel like there are still situations where Branded can play around that. They do also have Retribution plus Branded Fusion set up in the yard, so I don't know, rather than take a chance on Zeus not being enough with a board wipe, I decided to just go for the Baguska and, sit on that instead going into the opponent's turn. Make it that much harder for them to actually have plays on their turn. And indeed, they just top deck and pass, even though, again, they've got the Retribution, the Fusion, the Graveyard. Adding this back to try to activate this would have been pointless because they go for what? Albion or Lubelia and neither get to activate their effects. They can't go straight for Mirror Jade because they don't have an extra deck monster or a Fusion monster to banish. So, yeah, I mean, the Baguska ended up being phenomenal here. Plus, they're already only at 4,600, so, like, it does not take too much more field presence or damage in general at all for me to find lethal here. And even if worst case scenario, right? Like, let's say they, I don't know. Well, I was going to say, let's say they Gambit. They negated and destroyed the Reinoheart. But I have the Sulliek in hand, so if they did that, I would just pitch the Sulliek and gotten a search and brought it back anyway. But, like, even if they had negated and removed the Reinoheart without proccing it somehow, in the absolute worst case scenario, I guess I'll just battle with Baguska and then make the Zeus anyway, right? So, yeah, I think that this was a pretty interesting duel, even though I didn't do any, like, hyper-intensive milling, like milling 10 and proccing all my fusers, or like, all 2 of them, but but although we didn't do any crazy plays like that, I still think this was a phenomenal game, just for the nice back and forth, the use of interaction, and all that fun stuff. But we still have a couple more games to check out. Let us go into the next one. Okay, next opponent is on what I can only call a Warrior Pile, or W Link, Warrior Link. I don't know if it's an FTK or not. I didn't spot an obvious FTK line in their deck, but I mean, we've all seen decks like this. It's like, it's Warrior Link with the Isold and, the Ignoble stuff or whatever and all that fun stuff. Anyway, Gonna normal summon that Supreme Sea Mare, but it's gonna get Ash Blossomed, and this is what I was talking about earlier in the profile, when I talked about how Supreme Sea Mare, you never want to see this as opposed to like Reinoheart, because here I have a Metanoise that I can't use because I don't control a Tearlaments monster. Of course, Supreme Sea Mare being not a Tearlaments monster. Anyway, they're going to preparation of Rights, and rather than Ash Blossom it, I'm just going to go ahead and Droll and Lockbird. Because when I saw the preparation of Rights, there were a couple of thoughts going through my mind. I'm thinking Mekonko. Well, I'm also looking at how big my opponent's deck is. Because my first thought, me being like an older Master Duel player, I guess, remembering back to 2 years ago, my first thought was like, Drytron! But it's like, no, okay, it's probably not going to be Drytron. It's probably going to be Mekonko, especially with a 55-card deck, although it could really be either, or some other ritual deck, so I decided to just let it resolve, see what they added. Ended up being Ohime, which was perfect. I can just throw out the Droll and Lockbird, and I was mainly thinking Ohime, Mekonko is what was going to get added. And I knew this card also searched, so I knew if I Drolled, it'd be better. And plus, even if it is Drytron, I know, like, basically, all ritual decks will do a lot of searching. So, I think no matter what preparation of Rights got here, I was fine to Droll instead of Ash Blossom. And indeed, that is going to end up being just a straight-up turn ender. Gonna normal summon my other Supreme Sea Mare, binning the Havnis. We're gonna have to see if they end up having any disruption for us here. Otherwise, we're on a pretty fast track to building an 8k board here. Gonna use the Tearlaments Kitkallos effect to bin the Reinoheart. Looks a little weird until you remember I have the Sulliek in hand, so I can bring back the Reinoheart, pitch the Sulliek. That'll proc both Reinoheart and the Sulliek effect. And also, actually, on top of that, if you have a Tearlaments card in hand, with Kitkallos, I like sending the Reinoheart to the graveyard pretty much every time, assuming, of course, you didn't start your plays with the Reinoheart. But that is another reason to play Supreme Sea Mare, because it does open up that line a lot more, makes it easier to get both of your fusions. You don't have to, like, hope to mill the other few. Like, normally I'll send Havnis first, right, to leave 2 Scheiren in the deck, because if you're going to go for the mill 10 line, then you're more likely to mill one of the 2 Scheiren as opposed to the 1 Havnis. But again, with Supreme Sea Mare here, we don't have to rely on luck to mill the cards, right? We can, again, normal summon the Sea Mare, send a Fuser, go for Kitkallos, send the Reinoheart from deck to graveyard, and again, you have to have a Tearlaments card in hand as well, but then you can send the Tearlaments card, bring back the Reinoheart, send the other Fuser, etc., etc. You're good to go from there. You can even then fuse for the Rulkallos, and then overlay the Reinoheart and Sea Mare into a Redoer, and potentially use Redoer to send the Reinoheart on the follow-up turn for more fusing, more plays, you know the drill. So, yeah, it's good stuff there. Let's go ahead and see the last duel that we've got lined up for this video. And this last game is going to be up against Mannadium, the other big synchro deck of the meta. One of the other tier 1 decks of the meta. I'm thinking more and more about the tier list, because that video is coming up probably sometime next week, and I think I am probably going to call Mannadium tier 1. It definitely feels like it to me. Anyway, we are going second here, but it's going to start with Reinoheart at arrival. I'm going to chain the Maxx to the normal summon of the Reinoheart as soon as that's done resolving. The reason I throw out Maxx here is because I know they can just link this directly into the Lightheart. And if your opponent has a Link 1 play that you're aware of, you should definitely throw out the Maxx before they have a chance to get there. But here, of course, they're going to have the cross out, so not going to be resolving the bug here. But I do have both Super Poly and Heartbeat, as well as Wraitsoth for the Fenrir in hand. So I'm actually really liking this hand for going second. If my Maxx is going to get negated, I definitely want it to be with a hand like this. So indeed, they linked off for the Lightheart. We'll special the Meek first, right? Meek, or Vice popping Meek. So they opened Reinoheart plus Meek, looks like, which I think should be a full combo line, but okay, they're going for a 10. It's a Chaos Angel. I just feel like they did it kind of weirdly here, didn't they? Like, hang on, we popped Meek. We popped Meek, and we did not... Oh, we brought it back as a 2. We didn't bring it back as a 4. That's why we didn't go for an 8. Because, like, I was trying to figure out why we didn't go for, like, Pater, you know, into the... Like, you know, do the combo line. But I think maybe our opponent either doesn't know the line, or I think, if I recall correctly, they forgot to change the Meek from 4 to 2. Which is... It's one prompt. It's very easy to just click through that. I mean, God, I do that all the time. Just right-clicking through a prompt, thinking that I don't need you know, to affirmatively answer it, but then I do. Okay, they are doing Cross Sheep and the Astrolaud and a second to 10. Okay, so it's just, oh no, Shengying. Yeah, that's right. I remember this game now. They ended on Chaos Angel Shengying instead of Baron Pater. I think they could have ended on a Napalooza, too. But, whatever. In any case. So, I'm thinking about how I'm going to out this board, right? God, this Reinoheart also was a phenomenal draw. Woo, that was, like, probably just the best card I could have peeled off the top of my deck there. Thinking about how to out this board, it is important to note that the Chaos Angel was made with a light and a dark. I think that also might have been what my opponent was planning. I think they just went too far out of their way to make the Chaos Angel with a light and a dark, which, to be fair, is also a misplay I've definitely made before in the past as well. But that does require me to kind of think about how I'm going to deal with this. I do have the Super Poly, but even without the Chaos Angel's protection, this Shengying could potentially be a bit tricky to out. First things first, though, I want to take care of the face down card in case it's reframing. Do not want to deal with a counter-trapped Omni Negate. So I'll pitch Scream. Scream will add Sulliek, and then we're going to activate Wraitsoth next. Going to do it in this order because we have to special Fenrir while we control no monsters. So Fenrir is going to add the Tear Cache. Things are going great so far. Reinoheart bin the Havnis. Havnis F. Opponent does not have any responses. Again, they chose a board that's got better protection, but doesn't have any amount of disruption. And I think the board with disruption would have ultimately been better protection. Here, I'm going to use Kitkallos to add Scheiren, since I've got the Tear Cache I can just bin, mill a couple of cards, and then use Kitkallos to bring back the Tear Cache. That'll mill 5, plus another 3, for again a total of 10. What you end up adding or sending off of Kitkallos, like I mentioned before, it just so super depends on what you have in the hand, right? Here, I should not have procced the Metanoise. That was a bit of a misplay, because the only tier monster in my graveyard was the Kitkallos, and I'd rather have it stay there so I can fuse for Rulkallos off of this Scheiren effect right here. But, yeah, I get to fuse with their Chaos Angel, and then my plan was to use the Starving Venom effects to copy the Shengying. This would not only buff my Starving Venom, but if we look at our mills from earlier, there should be... Here it is. Yep, Fairy Tale Snow is in there. So it's not hard for me to banish stuff out of my yard. I can then use Starving Venom's Stolen effect from Shengying as non-targeting banishing to actually out the very Shengying I would have stolen, you know, the effect from. Plus, then, of course, I also steal the attack gaining effect for every banish card, so it becomes very easy for me to have lethal from there. Again, that Storming Venom Fusion Dragon, so good. Love that as a Super Poly target, but, yeah. That'll go ahead and do it for these games. Again, I had a blast playing this deck, and I hope you all had fun watching the duels here as well. That'll be it for this one, like I said, so let us now go ahead and move on to the outro. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. That means a lot to me. It's also a great way to support the channel, so thank you very much in that way as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other ways, like the very special patrons that I am thanking here, you can do so by checking out some of the links in the description. One of those goes to the Patreon, where you can join these fine folk and support the channel that way. I do post daily content over on Patreon, so you do get something for supporting there. And if you're interested, I also have a coaching tier option as well. Details again will be on Patreon in the link below. Also in the description linked below is my Twitch page where I stream a few times a week. You can go ahead and check that out, follow or subscribe over there if you ever want to catch me live. You'll also find my second YouTube channel if you feel like subscribing over there to watch some of the Twitch VODs as well as some additional non-Yu-Gi-Oh related content that I make over there. Again, any of those links you want to check out is all a great way of supporting. But again, even if you don't do that, just watching was also a fantastic way to support. And once again, I have to thank you so very much. But in any case, this is Hexlex. I'm going to be signing out, and I'm hoping you have a fantastic day.